Alright, my legends, welcome back to another video with your good old boy Jay. And this week, we are going over my creative process for conceptualizing a piece with a dynamic action pose. Because I think for a lot of artists out there, when they create a piece of work, I think they're generally very comfortable with creating pieces that are a bit stiff with poses, because they know that they will have issues tackling certain foreshortening and certain action poses where the body might be in a more challenging pose to draw. So with this video, I want to be able to help you out a little bit if you're interested in doing a more dramatic or dynamic composition. So I'm personally a really big fan of things such as, League of Legends splash arts. I think those are probably some of my favorite when it comes to dynamic compositions. Though I think those pieces are a masterclass at showing as much as possible with one image. With those splash arts, they are using it as the main way of marketing their skins, generally speaking. And I think a lot of people buy skins based off of splash arts, so they really have to just sell everything about the champion and the skin within that piece of art. And they need to make it the most appealing thing ever. So what I do right off the bat is I like to draw a couple of thumbnails just to explore what kind of pose or composition I want with the piece that I'm working on. As you saw in the beginning of the video, I did a couple of thumbnails. But, sometimes in your head, you're usually, you probably likely already have one that you really like. Or if you're someone that needs a little bit of visual help to really, help you explore some ideas that you might like, then, I recommend doing more thumbnails if it's something that benefits you. So right afterwards, I went into a free random fucking 3D modeling program online, or 3D poser program, to get a bit of a quick reference to help me out a little bit with perspective and the pose. Because when you're doing a pose from your head, right, this is something that I just came up with. I didn't look at any references for this pose. So right off the bat, it's gonna be a little bit difficult to create your drawing unless you're really, really good at figure drawing, which I'm not, right? So I need all the help I can get. So what I did is I went to a 3D poser program online and just kind of quickly got the pose that I sort of want. It's flexible. You can go in later and change your drawing based on the pose. But I think it helps a lot to just have something there to help you out, even if it's inaccurate or the proportions are weird, just to help you get something down on the canvas. So after using the 3D to give me a bit of an idea of what the pose should look like, I went in with another rough. Right, I do a lot of these roughs because I have a really hard time getting accurate proportions and stuff right off the bat. So I do a lot of iterations to help me refine, which is why I work very slow. It's because I don't have a good solid understanding of drawing where I can just do the accurate proportions and perspective on my, on the first 1-2 try. And when you're doing something dynamic, you shouldn't be discouraged that you can't do the pose, because I've seen a lot of artists, fucking great acclaimed artists, they do very well on social media. Perspectives are not their strong suit, right? They don't really approach perspective. They don't try to challenge themselves with perspective. That's maybe more dynamic for their composition. And that's always something that I'm not afraid of, right? I'm not afraid of doing something that I know I can't do, right? Because it's gonna take me time to be able to solve it and figure it out. But I'll end up with something new and interesting that I've never tried before, and it's usually something that I'm very proud of. So a pose like this, it's actually a pretty interesting pose, and I would say it's a little bit difficult to do because it's like looking from upwards down, and the characters kind of looking up a little bit with the characters looking up in a straight on kind of pose. And generally, I would probably avoid a straight on pose like this. Right, because generally with the rule of thirds, right, which is a compositional kind of principle that you're supposed to follow when you're creating compositions, is that you should never place anything that's directly in the middle. But obviously with certain certain poses and compositions, you can obviously work with a central composition as well if that's what you're specifically going for. But generally, it is not recommended that you go for something that's central. It should be slightly off to the side and touching one of the you know, quadrants, or what would you say if it's in thirds? Quadrants is fourths, whatever. You know, there's the rule of thirds. If you don't know what it is, when you split your composition into 9 squares, so 3 rows, you know, going from left to right, 3 rows going from top to bottom, and the subject is meant to touch, I suppose, you know, not directly in the center, but not all the way to the side either. Generally speaking, it's a pretty good principle to follow. But for my purposes, I wanted something that is extremely central, right? As you can see, I have my one character here and the 2 kind of skeletal pet things on the side. So compositionally, it would be very difficult to do something that's non-central focused. So if you know what you're going for, it's perfectly fine to do a central composition. But you need to be mindful that that's what you're doing. So we're moving into the line art stage, and you know, I've always wanted to make a video specifically on line art because I personally really like doing line art, but there's really not a whole lot to say, really. How I do line art is that, you know, I give myself a loose base to draw on top of, and this is something that I think can help a lot of people, is that if you're not very solid with your line art, what you can do is do what I do and have rough first iterations and just gradually improve the lines on top of it. Yes, it is more work because you're not just, you know, doing something good and something solid right off the bat, but you know, you're giving yourself these small guides, right? You're giving yourself as much help as possible to help you accomplish a desired final product. And I think that's what's most important, is that you know, achieve the final product that you want. And how I achieve my final product is that I have a lot of roughs before that to make sure that all my lines are placed properly when I finally do my clean, you know, dark layer. And I suppose another tip is that when you're doing lines, you should go as thin as you can and then go back and thicken after the fact. You know, this is pretty basic stuff, because generally speaking, it's easier to mix something thicker and darker than it is to mix something thinner, right? So once you go dark and thick, it's very difficult to fix it, and it'll probably look like shit, and you probably have to just erase the whole thing and do it again. So I would definitely recommend going thin and then thickening things up, right? Because line width is also something that you need to be mindful of, but it's a concept that I don't think I can really verbally explain too well. But basically, if something's overlapping, you want to just darken the parts where they touch, and they'll give you a stronger 3D effect. It depends on your art style. There's some line art dependent art style where you need to do that a lot more. I've also seen a lot of anime art styles where the lines are extremely thin with not a whole lot of line weight to begin with, and it's just carried by the painting. So it really depends on what you want to do. But for my art style, I do like to go in and improve the line weight on some of the parts that has overlap. And you know, even when you start painting, don't be afraid to go back in and improve your lines if that's something that you think needs more work. Because currently for my drawings, I feel like I have this habit of doing large shapes and medium shapes, and I never really go in and do smaller details. Because when it comes to designing a character, you should account for large design elements, medium design elements, and small design elements. And I think for me right now, I'm not doing enough small elements, because small elements will really like give you a lot of detail and give your art a lot of personality, while the large and medium shapes communicate what your character is and their role and function. But the smaller details will do a good job at fleshing out the character even more, right, and give them a lot more interesting personality. But yeah, that's about it for today's video, talking a little bit about composition and line work and creating an interesting dynamic pose. Hopefully next week I can actually finish the coloring and show that off, but we'll see. Yeah, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.